I thought my life was defined by flour, sugar, and the quiet pride of running this town's favorite bakery for 32 years. Then my son introduced me to his fiancée, a girl who looked at my shop and saw a retirement fund instead of a legacy. She mistook my silence for weakness and my kindness for stupidity. She never expected that the sweet old lady behind the counter was preparing to destroy her entire world. My name is Eleanor Whitford. For 58 years, I have walked this earth, and for 32 of them, I have stood behind the counter of Whitford's Bakery in the heart of Kingsford Hollow, Ohio. The scent of yeast and caramelized sugar is not just a smell to me, it is the atmosphere of my survival. Since my husband passed away a decade ago, this shop has been my partner, my child, and my sanctuary. The locals here like to call me the town matriarch of pastries, a sweet old woman who always throws an extra chocolate croissant into the bag for the children. They see the flour on my apron and the smile lines around my eyes, and they assume I am soft. They are wrong. You do not run a business alone for 3 decades by being soft. You do it by being precise. You weigh every ounce of butter. You time every minute in the oven. You know exactly what everything is worth. That was why I noticed the change the moment my son, Adam, walked through the door with her. Adam is 33 years old, a brilliant software engineer with a heart that is perhaps too open for his own good. He is my only child, the one thing in this world I love more than my bakery. When he told me he had met someone special, I wanted to be happy. I truly did. But then he introduced me to Miranda Ellington. The Ellingtons are old money in this county, not the kind of money that buys a nice car, but the kind that buys the dealership and the road it sits on. Miranda was beautiful, of course. She had hair like spun gold and teeth that were blindingly white. But when she smiled at me, the warmth never quite reached her eyes. It was a practiced expression, like a mask she slipped on before entering a room. It is so wonderful to finally meet you. Mrs. Whitford, Miranda said, extending a hand that felt as cool and smooth as marble. Adam has told me so much about this place. It is charming, truly, quaint. There was a pause before she said quaint, a hesitation that felt like a judgment. I wiped my hands on my apron and shook her hand. It's good to meet you too. Miranda, I said. Adam tells me you work in interior design consulting. Actually, she corrected me, her gaze drifting over my shoulder to the display cases. I help businesses optimize their potential. We sat down for coffee at the small corner table by the window. Adam was beaming, so clearly infatuated that he could not see past the surface. He held her hand on the table, looking between us like he was waiting for a magical connection to spark. But while Adam talked about his recent project, Miranda's eyes were not on him. They were scanning the room. She looked at the vintage tin ceiling tiles. She looked at the line of customers wrapping around the counter. She looked at the heavy oak floors. Then the questions started. They were not the polite questions of a prospective daughter-in-law. They were the questions of an auditor. So, Eleanor, she said, dropping the formal title far too quickly. Adam mentioned you own the building outright. That is rare for a main street location these days. Do you handle the bookkeeping yourself, or do you outsource it? I handle everything myself, I replied, taking a sip of my black coffee. I like to know where every penny goes. Smart. She nodded, tapping a manicured fingernail against the ceramic mug. And the lot, adjacent to the back alley, Is that included in the deed? I noticed it is currently just being used for delivery trucks, which seems like such a waste of square footage. I stiffened. I had never mentioned the back lot to Adam. It was just a gravel strip I used for deliveries. How did she know about the deed boundaries? It serves its purpose, I said, keeping my voice even. Of course. She smiled, but her eyes were calculating. It is just that real estate in Kingsford Hollow has risen by 12% in the last quarter alone. A corner lot like this, well, it is sitting on a gold mine, if one knew how to extract it. Miranda is just great with numbers. Mom. Adam chimed in, squeezing her hand. She's always thinking about the big picture. I can see that, I said. I looked at this young woman, this girl who had not washed a single dish in her life, and I felt a cold chill settle in my stomach. She did not look at my bakery and see the memories or the hard work. She saw an asset. She knew the market value. She knew the zoning. She knew things about my property that even my neighbours did not know. You have built something really stable here, Miranda said, her voice dropping to a whisper that felt more like a threat than a compliment. It would be a shame if it stayed stuck in the past. I forced a smile, but inside, my alarm bells were ringing. I was not just meeting my son's girlfriend. I felt like a piece of livestock being weighed at the county fair, and the butcher was already sharpening her knife. She thought she was looking at a helpless old woman who made cookies. She had no idea she was looking at the woman who signed the checks. Over the next few weeks, Miranda became a fixture at the bakery, but she was never really a customer. While others came in for the comfort of a warm cinnamon roll or the familiarity of my conversation, Miranda came in to inspect. She would run a finger along the display case, checking for dust that was not there. She would stand in the corner while I dealt with the morning rush, her eyes tracking the speed of the transaction, calculating the throughput. She never bought a thing. It was as if she was appraising a house she had already decided to gut. Then came the invitation. Adam told me that his future in-laws wanted to host a quiet family dinner to get to know me better. I put on my best navy dress and drove my old sedan up the winding driveway to Ellington Crest. The place was not a home. It was a monument to excess. Iron gates towered over the entrance, and the house itself loomed against the night sky, a sprawling stone fortress that seemed to look down on everything below it. Inside, the air was cold and smelled of expensive lilies. That was where I met Lucinda Ellington. If Miranda was a polished blade, her mother was the whetstone. Lucinda sat at the head of a mahogany table that could have seated 20 people, yet there were only 4 of us. She watched me approach with a gaze that made me feel like I was applying for a housekeeping position rather than dining as an equal. So, Eleanor, Lucinda said after the soup was served, her voice smooth but lacking any genuine warmth. Adam tells us you have been slaving away at that little shop for over 30 years. That is a very long time to be on your feet. It is not slaving away when you love what you do, I replied, keeping my posture straight. The bakery is my life. Lucinda exchanged a quick, knowing look with Miranda. It was a subtle glance, barely a flicker, but I caught it. Of course, Lucinda continued, slicing her steak with surgical precision. But surely, a woman approaching 60 must think about the next chapter. Modern economics suggests that holding on to labour-intensive assets past the age of 55 is unwise. It is the time to hand over the burden to the younger generation. Is it not? I felt a tightness in my chest. I am 58, Lucinda, and I have plenty of energy left. Miranda chimed in then, leaning toward Adam and placing a hand on his arm. Her voice was dripping with faux concern. Adam. Honey? That is what we were talking about last night. Right. With the wedding coming up. And then, well, the future. I just worry. Is your mom really going to be able to keep up with the demands of a commercial kitchen? It is dangerous work for someone her age. Adam smiled at her, completely blind to the trap being laid. Mom is a machine, babe. She can outwork anyone I know. I know. I know. Miranda sighed, looking at me with eyes that were hard as flint. I just want to make sure she is protected. We would hate to see the quality suffer because she is too proud to accept help. The conversation turned to finance, and Lucinda began talking about the consolidation of small assets in the downtown area. She spoke of businesses like mine not as community staples, but as underperforming real estate squares on a monopoly board. We have been looking at the valuation of several small properties on Main Street, Lucinda said, taking a sip of wine. It is fascinating how many owners do not realize they are sitting on land worth 10 times their annual revenue. They cling to sentimentality while their equity stagnates. I felt a chill run down my spine. They had researched me. They knew my numbers. They were not talking about the market in general. They were talking about my shop. As the dinner ended, Miranda reached under the table and pulled out a thick, bound folder. She slid it across the mahogany surface toward me. I had some of my team draw this up, Miranda said, her tone breezy. Just some ideas. No pressure. I opened the cover. The title page read in bold, modern font, Ellington Sweets & Co., a strategic rebranding proposal. What is this? I asked. My voice barely a whisper. Just a vision for the future. Miranda smiled, but her teeth looked sharp. Because let's be honest, Eleanor, the current brand is a little tired. Don't you think the proposal sat on my kitchen table like a loaded weapon? Adam had brought it over with a smile on his face, completely unaware that he was handing me a document that erased his father's legacy. He paced around my small kitchen, energized by Miranda's influence, talking about synergy and brand recognition. Mom, listen, Adam said, stopping to look at me with pleading eyes. Miranda and I, well, we want to build our future together, and she thinks the bakery is the perfect foundation. But we need to modernize. We need to do it the Ellington way. I looked down at the mock-up logo Miranda had designed. The elegant script no longer read Whitford's Bakery. It read Ellington Sweets & Co. in gold lettering. My stomach churned. 32 years of waking up at 3 a.m, 32 years of kneading dough until my knuckles ached. All to be wiped away by a 24-year-old girl who thought my life's work was nothing more than a stepping stone. You want to take my name off the door? I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to stay calm. Your father's name. It is not about erasing the past. Mom, Adam insisted, though he had the grace to look away. It is about elevating the brand. Miranda says Whitford sounds a bit dusty. Ellington implies luxury. It implies class. Dusty, I repeated, feeling the word like a slap. She just wants to help you retire. Mum, Adam's voice rose. Defensive now. Why do you have to be so stubborn? She is trying to secure our future. That was the knife in my heart. My son, the boy I had raised to be kind and honest, was looking at me with frustration because I refused to let his girlfriend cannibalize my identity. He did not see the greed. He only saw a woman he wanted to please. The pressure did not stop with Adam. 2 days later, Lucinda Ellington stopped by with a document she called a formality. It was a temporary management authorization form. It just allows Adam and Miranda to make vendor decisions and sign checks while you transition into your golden years, Lucinda said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. You do not want to be bothered with invoices at your age, do you? Eleanor. Just sign it. And you can finally rest. I might have signed it. I might have given in to the exhaustion and the gaslighting if my phone had not rung that evening. It was a blocked number. When I answered, the voice was hushed and hurried. It was a local accountant I had known for decades, a man who usually kept to himself. Eleanor, do not say my name. He whispered. I heard about the papers. Do not sign anything. The Ellingtons, they did this to the Miller hardware store 5 years ago. They get temporary control, leverage the assets against loans for their own ventures, and then bankrupt the original business. They are cash poor. Eleanor, they need your bakery to float their debts. The phone clicked off, leaving me standing in the silence of my living room. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This was not about modernizing. This was not about a wedding gift. This was a hostile takeover disguised as a marriage. They looked at my shop and saw a lifeline for their crumbling empire. I walked to the window and looked out at the street lamp casting long shadows on the pavement. A mix of emotions swirled inside me. I felt a profound, aching grief for Adam, who was being played for a fool. I felt terror at the thought of losing everything I had built. But beneath the fear, something cold and hard began to crystallize. They thought I was a senile old woman who baked cookies. They thought I was weak. I looked at the pen Lucinda had left on the table next to the authorization form. I did not pick it up. Instead, I sat down and folded my hands. If they have decided I am the prey, I thought, staring into the dark, then shouldn't I play the role to perfection? I began to play the part they had written for me. I became the confused, tired old woman they desperately wanted to see. When Miranda came into the bakery to measure the walls for her imagined renovations, I did not scowl. Instead, I offered her a fresh scone and feigned exhaustion. Oh, Miranda, dear, I said, wiping flour from my hands and letting my shoulders slump. I am just so overwhelmed by all these forms Lucinda sent. I am so glad Adam has you to handle the hard stuff. My eyes they aren't what they used to be. It worked like a charm. The predator in her relaxed. She stopped shielding her phone screen when I walked past. She stopped lowering her voice when she took calls from her mother. She thought the hunt was over and the carcass was already dressed. But while Miranda was busy picking out paint swatches for a shop that did not belong to her, I was busy digging. I spent my nights poring over public records and city planning documents, looking for the reason why a wealthy family would be so obsessed with a small-town bakery. I found the answer buried in the appendix of a proposed municipal bill. My bakery sat directly in the center of the new Kingsford Revitalization Project. The city was planning to build a high-end pedestrian mall, and my corner lot was the anchor point. The value of my land was not $300,000, as Lucinda had suggested. With the new zoning, it was worth nearly $2 million. They knew. Of course they knew. Lucinda Ellington sat on the charity board with the mayor's wife. They were not trying to help me retire. They were trying to buy a winning lottery ticket for pennies before the numbers were announced. I drove 2 towns over to meet with Arthur Henderson, my late husband's attorney. He was a man who still wore suspenders and trusted no one. I had kept him on retainer for years, a fact I never mentioned to Adam. Arthur looked over the management authorization papers Lucinda had given me and let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Eleanor," he said, looking over his spectacles, "if you sign this, they can legally leverage your property against their own debts. And from what I am seeing in the county lien records, the Ellington estate is leveraged to the hilt. They are drowning in debt. Eleanor, they need your clean assets to float their sinking ship." "So they are stealing my life's work to pay off their credit cards?" I asked, my voice shaking with rage. "Essentially, yes," Arthur replied. "And if you sign, it is all legal." I drove home in silence. The fear that had gripped me for weeks evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, burning clarity. I sat in my dark kitchen, the same kitchen where I had taught Adam to crack eggs, and I looked at the empty chair where my husband used to sit. "You want to beat an old woman?" I whispered to the empty room. "Fine. Let's see how you handle it." I picked up the phone. I did not call the police. I did not call Adam. I called a commercial real estate developer from the city who had been sending me offers for 5 years, offers I had always thrown in the trash. "This is Eleanor Whitford," I said when he answered. "I am ready to sell, but I have conditions. Absolute secrecy. And the deal must be structured so the transfer happens immediately. Mrs. Whitford." "We would be delighted," the developer said, clearly stunned. But why the sudden change of heart? "Let's just say I am restructuring my portfolio," I said. I hung up and looked at the invitation to Adam and Miranda's wedding pinned to my refrigerator. It was embossed with silver foil, screaming luxury they could not afford. I did not just want to save my money. I realized then that saving the bakery was not enough. I wanted to wait until they were standing at the altar, thinking they had won everything, and then pull the ground out from under them. I wanted their collapse to be as public as their arrogance. I was going to ruin them, and I was going to do it with a smile on my face. The wedding day arrived with the subtlety of a coronation. Ellington Crest had been transformed into a spectacle of white roses and crystal chandeliers that must have cost more than most people in our town earned in a decade. I arrived in my modest beige suit, feeling like a sparrow entering a peacock sanctuary. I expected to be seated near the front. Perhaps not in the first row with the immediate Ellington clan, but certainly close enough to see my son's face. I was wrong. The usher, a young man who refused to make eye contact, led me past the rows of velvet chairs, past the friends of the family, past the distant cousins, all the way to a folding chair set up behind a large floral arrangement at the very back. I was sitting next to the hired string quartet. "Lucinda thought you would be more comfortable here," the usher mumbled before hurrying away. "Better. Acoustics." I sat down, my hands clutching my purse. From this distance, Adam looked like a stranger. Lucinda was holding court near the altar, and Miranda was floating among the guests, accepting compliments with the grace of a queen greeting her subjects. She stopped near my exiled corner to speak to a group of wealthy investors from the city. "Oh, the bakery," I heard Miranda say, her laugh tinkling like broken glass. "We are completely gutting it. It is cute, but honestly, it is a teardown. We are keeping the shell for the rustic aesthetic, but everything inside goes. I need a clean slate." She did not see me. She did not care. A few minutes later, a flustered catering manager rushed through the side entrance near me, carrying a stack of papers. He collided with a waiter, sending a few sheets sliding across the polished floor to my feet. He scrambled to pick them up, apologizing profusely. But he missed one. It was not a catering menu. It was a fax, time-stamped from that morning. I picked it up. It was a memorandum from the Ellington family lawyer to a real estate holding firm. My eyes scanned the legal jargon, and my heart stopped. It was a pre-sale agreement for my lot. The terms were clear. The Ellingtons had already agreed to sell the land the bakery stood on for $2.5 million. The closing date was set for exactly 3 days after the wedding, the day after I was supposed to sign the management authorization. They were not going to rebrand. They were going to liquidate. They were going to raze my 32 years of history to the ground and pocket the cash. I folded the paper calmly and slipped it into my purse. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture, sending it immediately to Arthur with a simple text: "Proceed with the contingency plan." I needed to see my son. I found Adam in a small waiting room off the main hall, adjusting his cufflinks in front of a mirror. He did not look like a happy groom. He looked exhausted. "Mom?" he asked, turning around. "What are you doing back here? I thought you were out front." "I just wanted to see you," I said softly. "Miranda is—" "She is really stressed," Adam said, rubbing his temples. "She just yelled at me because the napkins are off-white instead of ivory. I mean, it's just napkins. Right, Adam?" I stepped closer, placing my hands on his shoulders. "Are you happy?" He hesitated. For a second, the mask slipped. I saw the doubt in his eyes, the realization that he was marrying a woman who cared more about the color of napkins than the feelings of her husband. I don't know," he stammered, looking down. "She has changed. Mom, ever since we got engaged, it is like nothing is ever enough. She talks about the bakery like it is hers, like I am just an employee." I wanted to scream the truth. I wanted to show him the paper in my purse and tell him that he was being used as a pawn in a financial scam. But I looked at the door, hearing the music swell. If I told him now, in private, Lucinda would spin it. She would claim I was a jealous mother trying to ruin the wedding. She would manipulate him back into her web. No. The wound had to be cauterized in the open air. "Listen to me," I said, smoothing his lapel. "Whatever happens out there today, know that I love you, and know that sometimes things have to fall apart so they can be put back together the right way." "What do you mean?" Adam asked, confusion knitting his brow. "Just trust your gut." "Adam," I said, "when the moment comes, trust your gut." I kissed his cheek and walked out before he could ask another question. I returned to my seat behind the flower arrangement. The music stopped. The guests hushed. The show was about to begin, and I was the only one who knew the script was about to change. The ceremony was moments away from beginning. The guests had taken their seats, a sea of designer hats and whispered judgments. I had been summoned to the side vestibule, a small alcove draped in heavy velvet curtains, where the wedding party was making their final adjustments. Lucinda wanted to give me instructions on when exactly I was allowed to stand, lest I ruin the choreography of her perfect day. Miranda was there, checking her reflection in a compact mirror, while Lucinda loomed over me like a hawk. "Now, Eleanor," Lucinda said, adjusting the diamond brooch on her lapel. "When the officiant asks who gives the groom away, you remain seated. We do not want to draw attention to, well, to the disparity. You should just be thankful Adam is lucky enough to bear the Ellington name soon. It is the only thing that will give him any real standing in this world." I stood there, taking the insult without flinching. I was used to it by now. But then Miranda laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. Honestly? Mother? Miranda said, snapping her compact shut. Can you imagine if we had kept Whitford? It sounds like a brand of discount bread. We are doing him a favour by erasing it. She smirked at me, a look of pure, unadulterated condescension. That was when the heavy velvet curtain behind them rustled. It was not a breeze. The fabric was shoved aside with a violence that made Lucinda jump. Adam stepped out. He was fully dressed in his tuxedo, but his face was drained of all colour. He looked like a man who had just watched a car crash in slow motion. He had been standing there the whole time, waiting to surprise me. Adam Miranda's voice pitched up, her smile faltering instantly. Honey, you aren't supposed to see the bride before, is that what you think? Adam asked, his voice shaking. You think you are doing me a favour? Oh, stop it. Lucinda waved her hand dismissively, though her eyes darted nervously to the guests just beyond the archway. We were just talking business. Adam, do not be dramatic. Business. Adam stepped closer to Miranda, ignoring his mother completely. You just laughed at my mother. You just laughed at the name my father gave me. Adam, please. Miranda reached for his arm, her eyes wide with panic. I am just stressed. It is the wedding jitters. You know I love Eleanor. Adam pulled his arm away as if he had been burned. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. He saw the coldness I had seen from the beginning. You don't love her, Adam said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. You don't even respect her. You look at us and you see. What? Dirt, something to be cleaned up. Lucinda stepped between them, her face flushing with anger. Pull yourself together? Adam, she hissed, do not ruin this. You are marrying into one of the most powerful families in the state. That little bakery of yours is a crumb compared to what we are offering you. A tiny shop is not enough for you or your mother to hold your heads high in this town. We are giving you dignity. The silence that followed was absolute. I watched my son. I saw the heartbreak in his eyes, the shattering of the illusion he had been living in. But then, I saw something else. I saw his spine straighten. I saw the boy I raised become a man. He did not yell. He did not argue. He simply looked at Lucinda, then at Miranda, with an expression of profound disappointment. Dignity, Adam repeated, the word tasting bitter in his mouth. You think dignity is something you can buy? He turned around and walked away from them. He did not walk back to the dressing room. He walked straight out of the alcove, past the stunned bridesmaids, and up the steps to the altar. Miranda gasped, realizing too late what was happening. Adam. Wait. I stood frozen in the vestibule. My hand was clutching the strap of my purse, where the incriminating document lay hidden. I had planned to be the one to expose them. I had planned to be the one to burn it all down. But as I watched my son walk toward the microphone, standing alone before 300 confused guests, I realized I did not need to start the fire. The truth had already lit the match. The crowd quieted down, a ripple of confused murmurs spreading through the garden. Adam stood before the microphone, his hands gripping the podium so hard his knuckles were white. He looked out at the sea of faces, took a ragged breath, and prepared to speak. The storm had arrived. Adam gripped the microphone stand, his knuckles white against the metal. The feedback whine pierced the air for a split second before his voice boomed across the manicured lawn, silencing the 300 guests who were waiting for a bridal march. There will be no wedding today, Adam said, his voice trembling, not with fear, but with a cold, hard fury. I cannot marry a woman who looks at the person I love most in this world, my mother, and calls her dignity something that needs to be bought. A gasp ripped through the crowd. It sounded like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the garden. Miranda stood at the bottom of the stairs, her face a mask of crumbling plaster. "Adam!" she shrieked, hiking up her heavy silk dress as she scrambled toward him. "You are making a scene. Get down here right now. How? How could you do this to me? To my reputation? Your reputation?" Adam laughed, a dry, broken sound. 10 minutes ago, I heard you and your mother laughing about erasing my last name. I heard you call my mother's legacy a crumb. You do not want a husband, Miranda. You want a prop. Lucinda Ellington marched out from the front row, her face turning a violent shade of purple. She pointed a shaking finger not at Adam, but past him, directly at me where I sat by the musicians. "You," Lucinda screamed, losing all pretense of high society grace. "You poisoned him. You jealous, bitter old woman. You couldn't stand to see your son rise above your station. So you ruined everything." The eyes of every banker, lawyer, and socialite in Kingsford Hollow turned to me. They expected me to shrink. They expected the baker to crumble. I stood up. I smoothed my skirt, and I walked toward the stage. I did not rush. I walked with the steady, heavy rhythm of a woman who has spent 30 years standing on her feet for 12 hours a day. The crowd parted for me. When I reached the stairs, Adam reached down to help me, but I shook my head. I walked up to the microphone myself. I did not poison anyone. "Lucinda," I said. My voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made the whispers die instantly. "I just decided to stop letting you lie." I opened my purse and pulled out the crumpled fax that the waiter had dropped. I held it up so the light caught the Ellington crest at the top. "You told my son you wanted to modernize my bakery," I continued, turning to look Miranda in the eye. "You told him you wanted to build a legacy. But this document, this is a pre-sale agreement, dated today, signed by your mother." I looked out at the crowd, making sure my voice reached the back row. "They have already sold the land my bakery sits on," I announced, "for $2.5 million. The closing date is set for Tuesday. They were never going to rebrand it. They were going to bulldoze it." The murmur in the crowd turned into a roar. I saw people pulling out their phones. I saw the investors Miranda had been bragging to earlier exchange dark looks. "And do you know why I asked?" turning back to Lucinda, who looked like she was about to faint. "Because Ellington Crest is not the fortress you all think it is. It is a house of cards. This family is drowning in debt. They have leveraged this estate 3 times over. My bakery, my little crumb of a shop, was the only liquid asset they could steal to pay off the interest on their loans." "Liar," Lucinda screeched, lunging forward, but her husband held her back. "We are the Ellingtons. We own this town. We deserve that land. It is wasted on flour and sugar. It is not wasted," Adam said, stepping next to me. He looked at me, and for the first time in months, I saw the fog clear from his eyes. There was pain there. Yes, but there was also a fierce, burning pride. "It is honest work, something you people wouldn't know anything about." Miranda fell to her knees, sobbing into her hands. But it was not the cry of a heartbroken woman. It was the tantrum of a child who had been told she could not have the toy she wanted. But the money. Miranda wailed, looking up at her mother. You said the deal was done. You said we would be safe. The confession hung in the air, undeniable and ugly. The guests began to stand up, gathering their purses and coats. The illusion of the Ellington grandeur had not just cracked, it had shattered into a million irreparable pieces. I put my hand on Adam's arm. We were the only two people on that stage who were standing on solid ground. But there is one thing you missed in your meticulous planning. Lucinda, I said, my voice steady against the rising murmur of the crowd. You assumed I was a helpless old woman who would sign whatever paper you put in front of her because I was too tired to read the fine print. You were right about the land being valuable. You just underestimated how valuable. Lucinda straightened her spine, trying to regain some semblance of control. It does not matter what you think it is worth. The deal is in motion. Once we sort out this misunderstanding, the title will transfer. No. I shook my head slowly, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. It won't. Because you cannot sell what you do not own. And as of 9 o'clock this morning, I no longer own the land at 42 Maple Street. The silence that fell over the lawn was heavy, suffocating. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. I sold it, I announced, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. But I did not sell it to your predatory middleman who was going to give you a kickback. I sold it directly to the head of the Liberty Development Group. And because I cut out the parasites, I did not get $2.5 million. I paused, looking directly at Miranda, whose mascara was beginning to streak down her pale cheeks. I sold the land for $14 million, I said, 7 times the current market value. That is impossible, Lucinda sputtered, clutching her chest. No one would pay that. A man in a sharp grey suit stood up from the back row, the very row where Lucinda had banished me. It was Mr. Sterling, the developer I had invited as my solitary guest. It is entirely possible, Mr. Sterling said, his voice projecting clearly without a microphone. And the funds have already been escrowed. Mrs. Whitford drove a hard bargain. She is a terrifying negotiator. But Miranda's voice cracked, sounding small and broken. But the bakery, you sold the bakery. I sold the dirt. Miranda. I corrected her. I kept the soul. Clause 4 of the sale agreement states that the Whitford brand, the recipes, and all intellectual property remain solely mine. The developers are even building a brand new, state-of-the-art facility on the ground floor of the new complex, rent-free for 10 years, exclusively for Whitford's bakery. I turned to Adam. He was looking at me with his mouth slightly open, tears standing in his eyes. You saved it, Adam whispered. You saved the name. I made it bulletproof. I told him. The reality of the situation began to crash down on the Ellingtons. I could see the guests doing the math in their heads. The Ellingtons had pre-spent the money they thought they were stealing from me. They had likely promised my land as collateral for the massive loans keeping this estate running. You cannot do this? Lucinda shrieked, panic finally cracking her veneer. We have contracts, we have obligations. If that sale does not go through with our buyer, the bank, they will call the loan on the crest. Then I suppose you should start packing, I said simply. The crowd gasped. The look in their eyes shifted instantly from shock to a mixture of pity and disdain. The wealthy elite of Kingsford Hollow smelled blood in the water. They knew a bankruptcy when they saw one. Miranda looked from her mother to me, and then to Adam. She realized in that second that the golden parachute she had tried to stitch together had just turned into an anchor. She wasn't just losing a husband, she was losing her entire future. Adam, she sobbed, reaching out a trembling hand. Adam, please. I didn't know I was just doing what Mother said. We can fix this. With that money. With 14 million. We could. Adam stepped back, looking at her with revulsion. There is no we. Miranda, go find someone else to pay your debts. He walked over and stood beside me, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. I looked at Lucinda, who was now trembling, supported only by her husband's grip. You thought you were hunting a sheep, I said, my voice soft but amplified so every single person could hear. But you forgot one thing. Lucinda, you didn't just misjudge a mother. You misjudged a woman who had to stand alone to raise a child, and we do not break easily. Adam returned to my small bungalow that evening with a single suitcase and a look of utter defeat etched into his features. The silence in the car had been heavy, but it was the silence of healing, not hostility. He walked into his old bedroom, the one with the faded baseball posters still on the wall, and I saw the tension finally leave his shoulders. He was no longer the accessory to the Ellington dynasty. He was just my son again. We sat at the kitchen table late into the night, nursing mugs of hot tea. The house was quiet, a stark contrast to the performative chaos of the wedding venue. Adam stared into his cup for a long time before he finally found the courage to meet my eyes. I was so blind, Adam whispered, his voice cracking with the weight of his regret. I let them dazzle me. Mum. I looked at the gates and the fancy dinners, and I thought that was what success looked like. I didn't see that they were hollow. I didn't see that they were eating us alive. Love has a way of putting filters on the world. Adam, I said softly, reaching across the cracked laminate table to hold his hand. You wanted a future. There is no shame in wanting to build something beautiful. The shame lies with those who tried to build it on a foundation of lies. I thought you were just being stubborn, he admitted, a tear escaping down his cheek. When you refused to sign the papers, I was angry. I thought you were stuck in the past, but you were the only one playing chess while we were all playing checkers. I am so sorry. Mum, I almost lost you. You could never lose me, I said firmly. But listen to me. Adam, you cannot let this break you. You have to let it harden you, not into something cruel, but into something that cannot be easily scratched. You learned a hard lesson today. Do not waste it. The fallout in Kingsford Hollow was swift and merciless. Small towns have long memories, and the Ellington Betrayal, as the local gazette dubbed it, became the only topic of conversation. The story of how the wealthy family tried to swindle the beloved town baker was too juicy to ignore. Within a week, the gates of Ellington Crest were locked. Rumours swirled that the bank had initiated foreclosure proceedings on the estate. Lucinda and Miranda were seen loading a moving truck in the middle of the night, retreating to the city in disgrace. They vanished from our lives as quickly as they had entered, leaving behind nothing but a cautionary tale about greed. A month later, I stood across the street and watched the demolition crew arrive at the old bakery. It was a strange feeling to see the excavator claw smash through the brick facade I had painted myself 30 years ago. A pang of sadness hit me, a physical ache for the memories held within those walls. But then I looked around. Half the town had come out to watch, not to gawk, but to support. We are ready when you are. Eleanor, old Mr. Henderson shouted from the sidewalk, waving his cane. Just tell us where to line up, with the $14 million secured in the bank. I did not just plan a reopening. I planned a revolution. I hired a team of top-tier pastry chefs and staff, people who had passion but needed a chance. I sat down with architects to design Whitford Bakery and Atelier, a space that would be 3 times the size of the old shop. Adam took a leave of absence from his engineering firm to help me manage the transition. He took over the logistics, finally diving into the financial records I had kept private for so long. One afternoon, he looked up from a stack of investment portfolios, his eyes wide. "Mom," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "You aren't just a small business owner. You have diversified portfolios, municipal bonds. You have been running this family like a Fortune 500 company. You are incredible, I told you." I smiled, rolling out a fresh batch of dough on my kitchen counter. I know what things are worth. I felt a surge of energy I had not felt in decades. I was 58 years old, single, and starting over, but I felt younger than I had at 20. The air tasted sweeter. The mornings felt brighter. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my son. The Ellingtons had tried to bury me, but they forgot that I was a seed, and now it was time to bloom. 6 months later, the morning sun glinted off the polished glass windows of the new building. The sign above the door was hand-carved mahogany, illuminated by soft industrial lighting, reading Whitford Bakery and Atelier. I stood on the sidewalk at 6 in the morning, expecting to see a few loyal regulars. Instead, I saw a line that wrapped around the block. People were waiting in the crisp autumn air, chatting excitedly, some holding old photos of my original shop, others reading the glowing reviews that had already hit the local blogs during our soft launch. Adam stood beside me, adjusting his tie. He looked different now. The boyish uncertainty was gone, replaced by the confident stance of a partner. He watched the crowd, then turned to me with a look of pure reverence. "Look at this, Mom," Adam said, his voice thick with emotion. "They didn't come for the fancy new building. They came for you. You are the strongest woman I have ever known. I'm just lucky I get to stand next to you. We built this together." "Adam," I replied, squeezing his hand. "It takes strong roots to grow a tall tree." The local paper, the Kingsford Gazette, had run a front-page feature on me that morning. The headline did not focus on the scandal or the Ellingtons' humiliating departure. It read, "The Art of Resilience: How Eleanor Whitford Turned Underestimation into an Empire." The article described my 32 years of kneading dough in the dark hours of the morning, transforming a humble passion into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. As I walked toward the back entrance to check on the prep team, a hesitant figure stepped out from the shadows of the alley. It was a young woman I recognized immediately. It was the housekeeper from Ellington Crest, the one who had served the tea during that first icy dinner with Lucinda. She looked nervous, clutching a resume in her shaking hands. "Mrs. Whitford?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I know who I used to work for, and I know you probably hate anyone associated with that house, but I heard you treat people fair, and I need a fresh start. You are the only person in this town who knows how to play fair." I looked at her. I could have turned her away. I could have let my resentment for the Ellingtons bleed onto innocent bystanders, but that is not who I am. "Can you carry a 50-pound sack of flour?" I asked. Yes, ma'am, she stammered. Surprised. I can work hard, I promise. Then grab an apron, I said, opening the door for her. We open in 20 minutes. And we are going to be busy. Inside, the kitchen was a symphony of activity. The smell of fresh sourdough and vanilla bean filled the air. Adam approached me with a tablet in his hand, showing me a digital map of the neighboring county. Mom. I've been looking at the numbers, Adam said, his eyes lighting up with the thrill of strategy. With the capital we have, and the projection for this quarter, we could look at a second location in Oak Creek by next year. What do you think? I looked at him, seeing the ambition that Miranda had tried to exploit now being channeled into something honest and real. Do it. I smiled. But remember the rule. Keep the name Whitford. Adam grinned. I wouldn't dream of changing it. The town had given me a new name, whispered with respect in coffee shops and boardrooms alike. They called me the Iron Baker of Kingsford Hollow. It was a title I wore with pride. I had walked through the fire of betrayal and come out not as ash, but as steel. As the doors opened and the first wave of customers flooded in, I retreated to the back of the kitchen. I stood before the massive, roaring deck oven, watching the flames dance behind the glass. The heat flushed my cheeks, reminding me of the thousands of mornings I had stood in this exact spot, alone, but never lonely. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of victory. Betrayal can make a person crumble. I whispered to the fire. But sometimes, it just reminds us exactly how strong we are. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you are tuning in from today. Drop your city or country in the comments below so we can say hello. If you enjoyed this story of justice and resilience, please subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people who need a little inspiration. See you in the next video.